Welcome everybody to this talk about sun protection, sunscreen filters under special scrutiny. First, I would like to thank ICADA for inviting me. This is my disclosure slide. Been working in the personal care industry for more than 20 years now, and I'm now a consultant. And I will talk about these three areas of challenges in sun protection. First, efficacy. Second, safety and regulatory. And third, environmental impact of sunscreens. And then come to a conclusion, trying to answer the question, which are the preferred UV filters for sunscreens. First, efficacy. How about sunscreen preventing malignant melanoma? Epidemiological data do not show a preventative effect, at least not yet. In the past 30, 40, 50 years, even to the contrary, the cumulative odds ratio of melanoma in the presence of sunscreen was positive, 2 or higher. This means wearing sunscreen was rather a marker for high sun exposure, but since 2000, the odds ratio is around 1. If sunscreens were really protective, the odds ratio would have to be, of course, below 1, as indicated in this dashed line. Now let's look at the sunscreen and the SPF determination. We know that sunscreen works in preventing erythema. And we also see in this picture when we don't have sunscreens that it actually does not work. So we also know which wavelengths of the sun contribute to how much of the erythema, the so-called erythema action spectrum. And we also know that at least non-melanoma skin cancer follows practically the same action spectrum as erythema. Hence, sunscreens are in principle an important tool to prevent skin cancer. A major reason, Adele Green, you see here on the literature, she did some landmark studies showing that squamous cell carcinomas can be prevented, and the follow-up also showed some indication that sunscreens work against melanoma. Now, this slide shows what could likely be a reason why it is so difficult to prove that sunscreens prevent skin cancer. Not all sunscreens with the same SPF are created equal. There are big differences in UVA protection. In this example of SPF 15 sunscreens, this varies from no protection to a factor of UVA PF 15, the same as the SPF. Therefore, we have this variety of UVA indicators in different countries and regions. For example, the European recommendation with the UVA logo that you all know, saying that UVA PF should be more than 1/3 of the SPF. In this case, it would be 1/3 of 15, so it's more than 5. Ideally, we would have the same protection in UVA as we do have in UVB. SPF equal UVA PF equal 15. This can also be referred to as spectral homeostasis. Now we look at the situation globally, basically, what is the pathway towards this spectral homeostasis? We see the blue sunscreen from the US. It's the best you can make out of the filters available in the US. 3% BMBM, that's avobenzone in US, the only effective and efficient UVA filter. So they can only use 3%. And and this 3%, they give you still a lot of UVA passing through. Here, the transmittance is actually 4 times higher than the ideal sunscreen with a flat spectrum basically on the bottom here. And European sunscreens, this is the orange curve. It's much less UVA transmitted onto the skin, only about double the ideal sunscreen. And when you push it further with only broad spectrum UV filters and zinc oxide, you can come very close to spectral homeostasis, only 25% more transmission than with the ideal situation, which of course is still some going through, actually causing the erythema. So to do that, to actually assess these different types of sunscreens, the SPF alone, the gold standard, is not enough. And also together with the UV APF is not enough. It's just two numbers. So we need to look at every single wavelength. And there are 3 alternative methods that can do that. In vitro, it has been in the making for a long time. And then there's also an in vivo method based on diffuse reflectance. Together with in vitro part, this makes the hybrid diffuse reflectance, HDRS, and then in silico, where you calculate the transmission and then also the derived SPF and UV APF and so on. So there is these 3 methods that can actually go beyond this individual SPF numbers and the UV APF. And this is the situation, how it may look like in the near future. Toolbox of SPF determination. The gold standard, the most precise by definition, the accuracy is high, but it also comes with a price. So, and then we have HDRS, which will cost less because volunteers, they're not burned and have to come back after 24 hours, so you can be assessed immediately. And there you have also the information, in addition to the SPF, the UV APF, that comes with it automatically. Then you have in vitro, which of course does not rely on skin, so it's less accurate in principle, and also less costly. And we have in silico, which is entirely calculation, but based on models of the skin and calibrated with in vivo. So that means this in silico, of course, comes for free basically, but it's still quite accurate. I have a 4th alternative method here, UVA photography. It's very valuable, very useful for campaigns, to awareness campaigns. So it shows where is the sunscreen, where it is not. It comes like a shoe cream, like a black cream on the skin. And but it's very difficult to quantify. That's why it's really not accurate, but it's a very good tool to make to convince people that they are protected with sunscreen. So this about efficacy. So we turn to safety and regulatory. And here the greatest concern for many years was the question if sunscreens could be harmful for humans. The proverbial elephant in the room was the question if there is absorption of UV filters via skin. It is now clear all organic UV filters are absorbed to some extent. If there was still some evidence needed, we have it now with this study carried out by the FDA herself that was published together with a proposed rule 2 years ago. But it's interesting to note, now we look at the table of UV filters, which will be published in this book that I mentioned in the disclosure. So we see that benzophenone 3, which is absorbed much more than 10 times more than the other organic filters. There's a reason for it. It's not that it's only low molecular weight. You see here the Daltons, but you see that it's also in the window which of the partition coefficient octanol water, where the penetration is highest. So it's between -1 and +4. So right in there, and that's why one reason that explains why oxybenzone is so much absorbed by the body. So what does the FDA do with that? Based on this study, they have questions and they ask for data of all these organic filters. So only 2 filters, which are here in green, the inorganic filters, zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, are considered GRAS, which means generally recognized as safe and effective. And all the others need more data. They have penetration, they are absorbed more than 0.5 nanogram per milliliter in the blood, which means that they need to do not all maybe, but all these kind of tests and endpoints that you see here. Yeah. Now, since this is known, of course, globally, what does the FDA, what does Europe do about that? So you all know the European regulation, so I don't have to explain to you, but I want to show it in this example of the final opinion of bensphenone 3. It's now been released in March. And you see that the Europe is, has apparently sufficient data to make a safety analysis, a safety assessment. And what the conclusion they come to is that 6%, as it was used before, and as it used in US, is not safe for the consumer when it's in a body cream or spray. But it is considered safe for face or hand cream, so the exposure is much less, or lipstick. And now they carried on the safety assessment. 2.2% is actually safe also for the body and for sprays for the whole body. And the product protection is 0.5. If you combine both, of course, the body cream must only contain 1.7%. So this is a good example that the Europe does a proper safety analysis with the data they have. But on the other hand, of course, is not really relevant because in Europe, oxybenzone is not really used because of this declaration mandate because of the allergy potential. So nobody really wants to use bensphenone 3. So we have seen US and Europe as jurisdictions, 2 different jurisdictions, but there's another one, the Court of Public Opinion, that can ban UV filters, although they are not officially banned. And so you see here also from the book I was mentioning, Christiane Hanay showed the requirements here on the left-hand side, and then these additional requirements that you may have, especially these free-from requirements to avoid being downgraded by some apps, right? Because you may make a sunscreen, the best you know, and so on. And when you come to the market, some app in some region, some country may downgrade you. And that's, of course, what you want to avoid. But on the other hand, it would be nice to have some standards of proper assessments, and so that we take the opinion and the European regulation, for example, as good enough, and we don't need extra court here of this to ban other UV filters. So we come to the environmental impact, which was already touched upon with this app before. So a group of islands that I was not aware of before a few years ago, but they were the first here in Palau to ban reef toxic sunscreens. So what we see here is that this is a little country, yeah, actually 40 years or independent now, with 20,000 Palauans that are hosting about 100,000 tourists every year. So mainly because it's one of the best diving destinations in the world, and tourism makes up half of their income. Hence, they obviously want to preserve this income by protecting their coral reef, which I think everybody understands. So they have to, they implemented this Palau Pledge. So tourists that arrive must sign this pledge. Children of Palau, I take this pledge as your guest to preserve and protect your beautiful, unique island home. So I think it makes sense, and it may also even make sense to not to wear sunscreen at all when you go snorkeling, for example. You can wear a t-shirt or you can have your wetsuit, but so that really makes sense, right? Just to avoid the close contact of corals with sunscreen and with any other organic material or inorganic material. So, and now we move on to another bigger islands that had some impact also in the US and worldwide. You see here the paper of Greg Downs in 2015-16 that really triggered the whole legislation in Hawaii. And here you see in Consumer Reports, Greg Downs advocating that this reef safe label is not really defined, and it may still be a higher concentration in near the corals, as we just discussed before, when you go snorkeling or even touching the corals, of course. So he's right. I mean, this is the old risk assessment, I guess, 500 years ago with Paracelsus. It's also about the exposure. So, but what we see now is interesting that globally, worldwide, here a seal that I found in Switzerland, in German, written in German by a big German company, and so that they comply with the reef law in Hawaii. And of course, octinoxate and oxybenzone we don't really find in European sunscreens, because the one octinoxate or EHMC makes avobenzone unstable, and oxybenzone, as I said before, is not really used anymore for almost 20 years. So. But so let's turn to a bit more science, and I want to show you now how this developed. It was actually 2008, the first paper, Danovaro, Italian group. They got some big attention then, but over almost 10 years, nothing happened really. And it's only since Downs that we see much more papers now coming out, and I just want to show you a few slides with from a critical review from Caris Mitchellmore. What she found mainly is that there is a lot of concentrations mentioned in the nanograms per liter in all over the world, but the effects, or actually no response effect, are in the microgram or even milligrams per liter. So they tolerate apparently much more than actually was found in the sea. But let's see what she says in a few slides here. Just shows where sunscreen can come from. And here the oxybenzone on the right-hand side, all over the world, you find oxybenzone, but in these really huge differences in concentrations. And as I said, it really depends where you measure, when you measure, and how you measure. So it's really very difficult. And even these methods are just being developed now. So, and here the other filters, just from this review. And so there is already some material there, but it's just coming more now. And you see that not all filters have been found at every place, or have maybe not been looked for. And you see in the pie charts that there's different species being analyzed of these corals, different filters found, and also different endpoints being looked at. And here the last slide, where Caris Mitchellmore is trying to assess a little bit the risk. So the no observed effect concentrations, they're actually 50% of this various studies, they are at 1,000 micrograms. So that's 1 milligram. So that's actually quite high tolerance, would show a rather high tolerance. And when she tries to do some risk assessment here on the right-hand side, the summary of preliminary of these studies, just really very preliminary, there's more to come. Only few of these studies actually show a risk quotient over 1, where you have then a risk present. So we are looking forward to see more studies. Actually, Caris Mitchell-Moore should come out with one by the end of this year. So, and now this is to show that also the supplier companies, they did some of their homework and were looking at the effects of the UV filters onto the environment. So BASF came up with this Eco Sun Pass, and based on a patent and based on 8 endpoints like acute aquatic toxicity, like biodegradation, endocrine suspicion, and so on. And when it passes, then they also issue a label for the Eco Sun Pass approved that you can put on your sunscreen. So this is much more really substantiated, or it is substantiated, and not just a reef safe label without really substantiation. Next example is from DSM. They have integrated their analysis of the environment in the sunscreen optimizer with a so-called Eco Score. And I use here the same example as I did before with the BASF simulator with these 3 sunscreens, the US, the World, and the homeostasis. And the transmission curve, as you see, is similar. It's the same, basically. You get similar results. And what, in addition, now the DSM is doing this Eco Score. You see that the US sunscreens is performing quite badly. It's in the red, it's a G, whereas the European sunscreens with modern filters, with less filter for the same performance, is a C. And but then comes, to my surprise, this gray sunscreens closest to the specular homeostasis is back to a G. So it's also in the red in this Eco Score. And I guess, I mean, I didn't study this, I didn't develop this. It's, I guess it's a zinc oxide. And there we know that for transport, we have this label with the dead fish. It can be harmful. It's a hazard to the aquatic environment. But this is the hazard during transport. So I don't know how this fits in. It's not the same as a sunscreen, because there is, of course, a background concentration in the sea anyway, and it is an essential element for living organisms. So, this is open question to me. We certainly discuss that further. So now we come to a conclusion. We see it's not so easy. I mean, the efficacy, it's more or less easy than the safety. We have seen there's different approaches in the US and in Europe. And environment, we are really at the beginning. But so I still want to make an attempt to show you some conclusion. And let's first start maybe with the goals. What is an efficient sunscreen? What are the goals? Efficiency, of course, safety, and no or low environmental impact. So we already, then we have steps of development. We have to choose a UV filter platform. So there's already here a pre-selection of UV filters, which I did now in the sunscreen optimizer, and it's the example of Christiane Hanay that you will be able to read soon when it comes out in fall. So she did use this pre-selection of UV filters. So there is no octocrylene. There is, because of this potential downgrading, and since there's no octocrylene, there's also no avobenzone or BMBM, because it cannot be stabilized properly. So that's already a predetermination. But of course, you could also work with BMBM. But let's see how this turns out. So this is the example. initially with just a very high of a very low filter concentration, actually, with very efficient filters, but it's poorly soluble. So that means that there can be a problem with in the formulation, if you have that. So she just shows here different steps that you can go, and you see the efficacy. It's a nice broad spectrum protection, a little bit more, a little bit less UVA1, but very good. Of course, all fulfills the European recommendation and so on. There's no critical filters, not even octocrylene, for example. And the eco score now is in the A, B, C range, in the green range. And of course, this is just an example, and you will then choose based on other parameters, such as sensorial, whitening, and of course the costs, or some other secondary claims that you may have with these different sunscreens. Maybe even you want no nano, then you have like this 3, 4, and 5 you cannot use because it's nano. But that's the kind of development you will have, and the kind of filters you will use in the future. So for those who want to go deeper and dive deeper and know more, you can actually get this more information in 28 papers summarized in this Current Problems in Dermatology, volume 55, should come out in fall. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention.